On today's show, it's going to be all about number 13, Paul George, who was recently on the cover of Slam magazine, and he says he's back on his bully-ish this season. What does that mean for the Clippers? What does that mean for Paul George? He also had Steve Ballmer on his podcast to end season one. What great things did we hear from our owner? And did PG take a shot at Devin Booker in the interview with Slam? Going to be talking about it all on today's Locked On Clippers.
You are Locked On Clippers, your daily Los Angeles Clippers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, sir. You are locking in with the Clips. Thank you for making Locked On Clippers the first listen of your day, your team every day. I'm your host, Darian Vaziri, born and raised in LA and going into my 19th season as a Clipper fan this fall. You can also follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Dime Dropper Pod and subscribe to my own YouTube channel, Dime Dropper, for even more LA Clipper and NBA content. And Locked On Clippers, free and available on all your favorite podcast platforms, including YouTube, where I want you to comment anything that's on your mind in regards to the LA Clippers. And if you want to get specific to today's episode, let me know what you think of Paul George saying he's back on his bully stuff this season. And we're going to be talking about what that means for the Clippers in this one. His conversation with Steve Ballmer on Podcast P's season one finale, the takeaways from that, and did he take a shot at Devin Booker in that interview with Slam? But let's get right into it. So Paul George was on the cover of Slam magazine for the second time in his career, the first time with the Indiana Pacers. And of course, it's really cool to see a Clipper player on the cover of Slam. Some of the Clipper covers of Slam have been awesome in the past. Of course, there's that famous one with Darius Miles, Lamar Odom, and Elton Brand. And then there was the Montrezl Harrell Williams one. That was super fun with Patrick Beverley, the three guys that were traded for Chris Paul. And now we have Paul George getting on the cover of Slam magazine going into the 2023-24 season. You love to see it. I mean, you love to see the star player on the Clippers getting that attention because I am a fan of this team, as I said in the beginning of the show, for 19 years. The fact that we even have guys on the cover of Slam, a guy that was on the cover of 2K and Paul George, as a member of the Clippers, it still is a very surreal feeling. I know a lot of people will say, that's the problem with this fan base. They're too caught up in the fact that, they're just happy to have these guys. Yeah, I just don't want to forget where we came from. That's what makes us a very grateful fan base when we do have great players. And even though this has been a rough era, the 2-1-3 era for the most part, besides that 2021 season, I'm still very thankful to have Paul George on my basketball team, a player that is already one of the best Clippers in Clipper history. So let's talk about what he said in that interview. Now, the quote is what he said on Twitch, and I have talked about this quote on the show before when he said he was back on his bully-ish this season. That's the PG version, no pun intended. But PG saying that, let's just break it down. I love to hear it. One part of me says, I'm really happy that Paul George is saying he's going to be aggressive. He's going to be in attack mode. He's going to hopefully be more consistent. He's going to be focused. He's going to be locked in, and he's going to be that demigod that can't be guarded. That's an all-star, no questions asked. And even though he was an all-star last year, he was an all-star in 2021. There's 2 seasons that he hasn't been an all-star for the Clippers, mainly because he's been ravaged by injuries. The first one, he missed a quarter of the season. And I'm sorry, a third of the season. And then in the 2022 season, he missed 51 games. That's a very large chunk of games. So it's pretty normal why he didn't make the all-star team in those years. But if we have Paul George healthy, playing over 50 games, he has made the all-star team as a Clipper twice. And I would love to see him make it for a third time this upcoming season. Now, last season, Paul George's numbers were 24 points, 5 assists, and 6 rebounds. This season, maybe he can go to 25 points, 7 rebounds, and then the assists will probably drop now that we have Russell Westbrook, which is fine. We want the ball out of his hands in terms of playmaking a decent amount. We want him coming off screens, off of the ball, catching the ball in the mid post, receiving the ball where he can go to work within a couple of dribbles, not take too many dribbles and increase his risk of turning the ball over and making risky passes, in which he sometimes has a tendency, a strong one, to do, is turn the ball over and making risky passes that he has no business making. So I don't mind the assist numbers dropping, but this isn't a Paul George projection episode, preview episode. I'll be doing some of those in the coming weeks before preseason and as training camp hits. But this is just that quote, right? I'm happy to hear it. But then there's that part of me that says, Paul George, he has stuck his foot in his mouth on many occasions with these kind of quotes. You already know Laker fans and fans of other teams are going to take that quote and run with it and use it whenever he has a bad game. Can't this guy just stop talking? Oh, I'll believe it when I see it. He's all talk. Podcast P, pandemic P. Well, let's just take a brief look at the history of Paul George's quotes with the Clippers. Now, in 2019-20, he absolutely stuck his foot in his mouth on several occasions. I think there was one time where he said before the season, who's going to score on us? And, something along those lines of who's going to score on us. Then the one that really hurt was when he was going into the bubble. He said, my shoulders are feeling really good. I'm feeling great. And obviously he did not perform to the task. So him saying he felt great and all that didn't age well. Now, there's going to be people in this comment section on this video and people that have responded to the tweets and posts of Paul George saying that he's going to be back on his bully stuff, that he says these kind of things every year. That's not 100% true. What people are going to be referring to is the comment he made on All the Smoke going into the 2020-2021 season when he said, I'm on MFers' asses this year. But guess what? He kind of was. That was his best season with the Clippers. That may have been the best season of his career if you combine regular season and playoffs. In the playoffs, he averaged 27 points a game, 9.6 rebounds, which rounds up to 10, and 5.4 assists on 44% shooting, which obviously isn't insane, but he was taking tough shots. He was the number one option. He was playing 41 minutes. And when I say he was the number one option, he was the number one option in the last 2 games of the Utah series and for the entirety of the conference finals. Those are amazing numbers. 27, 10, and 5. I mean, Paul George backed up his talk that year. Now, 2021-22, he didn't say much. 2022-23 is when last season he said, I'm the most focused I've been in a while. And he said that he feels as good as he does health-wise going into a season in a long time. And it took him a couple of games to hit the ground running last season. So in that sense, he seemed very unserious. So my takeaway overall is, look, it's good to hear that Paul George is saying that. But at the same time, he needs to prove it with his actions. Talk is cheap. We're tired of hearing Paul George just talk about it. We want to see him be about it. And the main thing, 2 things. One is health. He mentioned that in the article or in the interview. But the second one is consistency. We just don't know which Paul George you're going to get on a given night. Now, a large reason you can say is because he's had so many injuries, he's not as confident in his body going to the basket. So he often settles for jumpers. And when he's starting to miss jumpers, he sometimes falls in love with it and he'll shoot himself out of the game. He won't get to the foul line. The refs do not give Paul George a generous whistle by any stretch. So then he'll often just be taking very tough jumpers all night. And he doesn't simplify his game by going to the post enough, catching the ball at the elbow enough, where I have said repeatedly in my first season as Locked On host, elbow P is dangerous. He catches the ball at the elbow. He can just rise up right then and there. Jab step, rise up, 1 to 2 dribbles, cash going either direction. He often can garner double teams. It's unstoppable. I think it's much more unstoppable than catching the ball behind the 3-point line with all eyes on him and the defense loaded up on him and him potentially running into more traffic. So those kind of things will help him be on his bully stuff. Now, let me just read a little bit more of the article. They asked, what are your goals going into next season? And he said, just focusing on the mentality. For me, it's just the mentality. I work extremely hard on improving and getting better, but for me, it's just the mentality. Going back to having that 22, 23-year-old mentality at 33 of every time I'm on the floor, I'm there to dominate and just be the best player on the floor at all times. So that's the mentality I'm going into it with. That's how I'm approaching the summer. At the end of the day, I love where I'll finish because if I have that mentality, I know I'm giving it everything I have and I can live with those results. So the constant M word being used there, mentality. Look, I always say it's all about confidence in sports. It's all about confidence in basketball. And that's the main thing that holds Paul George back. Confidence in decision making. It's not a lack of skill. Paul George, he checks off the boxes. He can score in any sort of way. He's got the physical gifts. He's got the more moves than you can count in his bag. He's got counters. One on one, he's fantastic. But a lot of it, it's in his head. And he talks about it all the time. And when I heard him say on his podcast that nowadays he lets the game come to him, doesn't look to be as aggressive going out and just destroying his opposite number, I talked about it on the podcast. I said, I don't know how much I like hearing that. But now he's going a different direction with his comments. Now he's saying the exact opposite, that he wants to go back to having that same aggression and mentality that he had in Indiana when he was young. I love to hear it because we want Paul George to be aggressive. Now, that's another main reason that I'm against the James Harden move. Because if we get James Harden, now we're accommodating him running a lot of pick and rolls. That's just going to give Paul George the ball less. That's going to have less plays for him. He might get more open shots, three ball, but he's not going to get any isolation kind of looks. And we still want Paul George. We don't want him to just be a spot up shooter. Of course, we want his life to be a little easier. We don't want him to be a complete spot up shooter, getting 8 to 9 shots a game and not shooting over 15 shots on numerous occasions. He is our second best scorer, whether we have Harden or not. And I think that without Harden, this optimizes Paul George's chances to be on his bully stuff next season and to be aggressive. And I really hope he backs up his talk because it's going to be really bad if he doesn't. And I believe if he's really with that mentality, I hope that he goes to the basket frequently because when Paul George is being aggressive going to the rim, that's when he's at his best. He still has enough bounce and athleticism to go to the rim and go up there with the best of them. He's freaking 6'8", 6'9" with bounce. He can't really be stopped when he's going to the rim aggressive, looking for contact and not just for fouls. But I get it because of his injuries, he can be hesitant sometimes with that. But Slam, the interviewer asked, "Is that what you meant when you said that on that Twitch live stream that you're going to be on your bully-ish this season?" And he said, 100%, 100%. That's exactly what I meant. I got to hold myself accountable to that. Every night I'm on the floor, keywords every night. So I hope you're listening to yourself, Paul George. Every night, not just here and there, not every other night. Every night I'm on the floor. I'm there to dominate, whether it's more physical or going right at whoever I got to go out. You're going to feel me. Pause. I'm having that approach of every time I'm on the floor, I'm there to dominate and destroy you. Anyways, I love hearing it. But coming up, Paul George recently had Steve Ballmer on his show. What did our owner say to him? What were the main takeaways from that? And Paul George, did he take a shot at Devin Booker in the interview? Going to be talking about that coming up. You ever want a meal but don't want to leave your house for it? Too tired, got work to do. It'll just optimize your day if you get it delivered right to your door. Well, then you got to download DoorDash. I oftentimes have that exact feeling, and sometimes there's just not food open in my area at a certain hour, and I'm not trying to go too far, and I'm trying to waste too much gas. So I go to DoorDash right away. It has the exact convenience that you would want right to your door. And with DoorDash grocery delivery, you can stock up for the week or order on last minute cravings conveniently. Get 50% off your first DoorDash order up to a $20 value when you use code LOCKEDONNBA at checkout. It's a limited time offer. Terms apply. That's 50% off up to $20, no minimum subtotal, and zero delivery fees on your first order when you download the DoorDash app in the App Store and enter code LOCKEDONNBA. Don't forget that's code LOCKEDONNBA for 50% off your first order with DoorDash. All right. Thanks for making Locked On Clippers your first listen every day. Every day is tomorrow on the show. How does the Damian Lillard trade affect the LA Clippers? That move absolutely shook the basketball world on Wednesday. I will be talking about how it affects the Clippers with all sides of the deal covered. So we're going to get into that on the Friday episode. But let's talk about the episode of Podcast P that Paul George had with Steve Ballmer. My first takeaways are that I am so unbelievably thankful to have this guy as the owner of our team. From the depths of hell with Sterling, a racist slumlord that didn't want to pay his players, didn't care about the fans, didn't care about putting a winning product out there, to have an owner that's so unbelievably enthusiastic, has like this coked out energy, seriously, or like on 10 caffeinated drinks. I mean, he is just a ball of energy. It's the most polar opposite change in ownership that I can think of in any American sport. Now, granted, I'm not some expert on every single team's ownership change, but wow, like it's just so surreal to me. I'm so thankful for Steve Ballmer and how much that he cares about the team. For him to be doing a podcast with one of our star players just shows such a difference in what kind of guy he is and the relationships that he has compared to Sterling. You would never find Sterling doing a podcast with his former players. He was just, gave off really weird vibes. But Steve Ballmer is probably one of only like two owners, him and Mark Cuban maybe, that would do a podcast with their players. And I think that's really awesome. And you just got to see more of his personality. He talked about the Intuit Dome a lot. And I thought there were some interesting things in there about, we all know about the wall, the 51 rows uninterrupted from top to bottom, not divided by suite levels, that is made for atmosphere. And I can't wait to sit in that. Hopefully it'll add that noise level that you see lacking from Staples Center, because there's 3 levels of suites and the sound really travels. Obviously the toilets, that was something that he touched on a little bit. The fixtures, because urinals don't technically count as toilets, about, having so many toilets that you're not waiting in lines and all that. And he said the leg room is going to be the best in the league. So some great advertisements for the Intuit Dome. One thing I thought was pretty funny was Paul George was getting so excited for it. And I'm just thinking to myself, well, man, you better hope you're playing in the Intuit Dome, buddy. And that's what this season is all about. That's why this season is so important, because it really feels like a last dance kind of season. I know that we had DJ on the show, the guy that does the Twitter spaces, and he said it was not the last dance to him, but it absolutely feels like a last dance kind of season. And on the Saturday episode I'm going to do, Lawrence Frank had a little media availability, and he had some quotes, some really, really eye-opening quotes. And he kind of declined to talk about extensions with Paul George and Kawhi. And that makes me think that there's not going to be an extension for those guys. They want to see how this season plays out. And granted, Kawhi Leonard and Paul George, they want to be here. They chose to come here. They're not trying to go anywhere else. So they have to kind of prove that if they want to stay long-term, they got to show they can stay healthy. And Paul George said in the interview, it's all about being healthy this season. But I just thought it was such a breath of fresh air to see Steve Ballmer in the way he is. He made me laugh so many times. He's like literally like a big kid, just so giddy. I mean, it's just incredible. And if I ever met Steve Ballmer, I would tell him thank you, because he really has made an impact on my life, as corny as that sounds. But my happiness is very much determined at times by the Clippers. And I mean, we haven't had one losing season since the guy became the owner of this team. Haven't had one losing season. We've made the playoffs every single year but 2. One of them was a play-in, and the other one we were the 9th seed in 2000. We were the 10th seed, in 2018. I mean, we have been a very successful franchise. I know that hasn't resulted in a championship, but we've been a very successful franchise, made it to our first conference finals, and you can just clearly tell he wants to win. He wants better. He's building a new stadium. It's going to be the finest in the league. We're going to have our own practice facility inside the stadium. I mean, Steve Ballmer is the man, and it was so cool to see him talking to our star player. But coming up, back to the Slam interview. Did Paul George take a shot at Devin Booker in the interview? Going to be talking about that coming up. All right. So let's go back to the Paul George interview. Slam asked, when you said on your live stream that you want to be back on your bully-ish, that you're going to be, what pushed you to that point? Did you feel like it was something that needed to be said? Was that something that was going through your head already? He said, yeah, I mean, it was just a lot of unnecessary talk going around the league of, guys feeling themselves and directing comment towards me that haven't done anything as well. This is the last couple years of my career, so it's all about legacy for me as well. And that's just my approach. I got to finish strong and go back to loving the game and loving to dominate. And again, that's just how I got to approach it. I come up short, that's on me, but that's how I got to approach it. So that does sound to me like he's talking about Devin Booker. Why Devin Booker? Well, earlier this summer, when Paul George had Klay Thompson on Podcast P, he asked him about the incident where Klay Thompson held up 4 rings to flex on Devin Booker that he had 4 championships. And Klay did say, I was in my feelings and Book was busting my ass that day, and I was not where I needed to be. We all get insecure at times. So Klay Thompson basically said, look, I was being immature. I was just mad that Booker was busting my ass. Now, Booker comments on a post of that nature, a post of that video with the salute emoji for Klay Thompson. And then he tagged Paul George and asked, is that the answer you was looking for? I don't know why Devin Booker reacted like that, as if Paul George was going to try like bait Klay Thompson into talking trash about Booker. I don't think that was his intention. But if you go back and you think, of course, there's the playoffs that we played against the Suns twice now, but Paul George didn't play the second time. But there was that regular season game in 2021 where Paul George had one of his best games as a Clipper, had like 40 plus points, was cooking Mikal Bridges, and he and Devin Booker got into a little bit of a scuffle. So Paul George responded to those comments by Booker on a stream when he was playing, it looks like Call of Duty. He said that was a sorry ass response by Devin Booker, because Paul George basically said, I'm not trying to, get Klay Thompson to say anything weird or anything like that. So I personally myself thought that was a little weird from Devin Booker, and I'm a big Devin Booker fan of his game, not necessarily a fan of him, the person or player, but I am a fan of the way he plays. But it was weird. So I think when Paul George says, guys, I want to read the quote again. Guys feeling themselves and directing comments toward me that haven't done anything as well, that sounds like Booker because he didn't have a ring. He's been to the finals. Paul George hasn't. But if you look at their resumes, Paul George has been around longer. He has a better resume. It's the facts. Besides the fact that Booker's gone one round further, Booker has never gone to the conference finals besides that. Paul George has been to the conference finals on 3 occasions. He's gone to the second round on 4 occasions. 5 occasions, actually, because the bubble as well. But yeah, and then he continues to say, the Slam interviewer asked, you use the words, go back to loving the game and loving to dominate. Was there a time you didn't necessarily feel that way? And PG went on to say that the injuries, makes you doubt yourself. And you can see that. You can see that. And it's not just Paul George. Every player, when they go through injuries and certain big ones, I mean, in Paul George's case, he has been through major injuries. I mean, it's very normal. It can affect your psyche. And he said, but at this point, I had a fluke injury to end the rest of my season last year. But up until that point, I was starting to get stronger. I was starting to feel better. Problems that I was having midseason were starting to go away. And that was the best I was feeling. And so I was coming into my stride, ready to get back into that. For a stretch, I didn't feel like myself just because injuries and stuff was aching and popping up. But I feel like I've been starting to address that every summer, little by little, to where I'm in a great place right now. So it's sad to see that or hear that Paul George said he was feeling his best before the injury, because we could actually see it. We started to see the Clippers play better. We saw him do a 360 and a half court set just minutes before the freak accident and the collision with Lou Dort. So it's sad because you could see that Paul George was starting to feel better. And hopefully he's feeling that way going into this season. And he says he is. They asked, what does Paul George being on his bully stuff look like? He says, I can't tell you what that looks like. I've been a pretty consistent scorer, been a high-level player for many years, but for me, it's just getting to a level of consistency. The key word I mentioned earlier, consistency. We all know what Paul George can be. We all know how great he can be when he's that great version. We just need that great version more frequently. At this point, Paul George has set himself up. He needs to perform now because he's saying all this. There's no ands, ifs, or buts about it. And no one's going to want to hear the podcast when you are not playing well and backing up your talk. At least no Clipper fans. But yeah, not backing down and destroying whatever I have to get where I need to go. So I think it'll be noticeable by the way I play this year, he says. I'm holding you to that, Paul. I'm holding you to that. But anyway, very interesting episode. Very interesting. If you want to go check out the whole article, the interview with Slam. You absolutely should. There was even more to it. I just don't want to read the whole thing. Like, I'm just basically reciting that article, but there was a lot of good stuff in there. As far as Paul George defending, guarding the best players on other teams, I think he will do that getting switched on to guys. But if we start Terrence Mann, I think Terrence Mann will be the one guarding the best players to start games. If we don't start Terrence Mann and we want to start Paul George at the 2 and Kawhi at the 3 like we have since we got them, then you might see Paul George out there guarding the best players every night. But I think him being on his bully stuff offensively and guarding the best players to start possessions every night is too tall to ask at 33. And we don't want him getting hurt again and overworking himself. I don't think any of his injuries have come from being overworked, but we haven't done that, what I just said yet, of making him guard the best players and be that guy consistently. So I don't even know if we want to do that. But let me know what you think of his comments. Do you think it's just Paul George sticking his foot in his mouth? You let me know. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Dime Dropper Pod. Subscribe to my own YouTube channel, Dime Dropper, for more, and comment on the video for Locked On Clippers. The age-old proverb continues: Go Clippers.